Hey, my name is ShawNshawN and I sell art on ShawNshawN.com and specials on eBay. Today we're going to review Midsommar. So Midsommar is a film by Ari Aster, a little bit long, 2 hours 27 minutes, so you're getting pretty long. Florence Pugh plays Dani, this psychologically broken woman. Jack Renner plays her reluctant boyfriend Christian. Wilhelm Blomgren, he plays Pelle, this Swedish guy that convinces all his friends to go to Sweden with him on a trip, cultural trip. Will Poulter plays Mark, and there's a couple other actors, obviously a lot of Swedish actors. So the story starts with Dani is always kind of paranoid about her sister who's bipolar, and she gets this really strange sensation that, you know, something's really wrong with her sister, and her sister lives at home with her parents. And unfortunately her premonition is right. She calls her boyfriend, like, oh, can you come and call me? And then finds out, you know, the boyfriend's just on the verge of probably breaking up with her because he's kind of sick of all her psychological crap with her sister, and her friend's like, dude, get rid of this girl. At that moment her sister kills herself and her parents, so then she's totally distraught, mentally grieving, and the boyfriend feels like, oh, I can't break up with her. That'd be too mean, right? So he sticks along another year, and it comes up to her birthday, and this Swedish friend of her boyfriend says, hey, I'm organizing this cultural trip, you guys can see all these cultural ruins and see this Midsummer festival where we kind of celebrate the solstice of the year when it's the highest points, midnight sun. So there's the sun never sets basically on the horizon, really far north in Sweden. So that's kind of where the story goes. So Act 1 is kind of, you know, the suicide break with Dani. They go to Sweden, and then Act 3 is kind of this bizarreness of this village where they visit. So you know it's always a bad day. A bad idea to go with your friends off in the wilderness, right? It's a classic horror film plot. It's always good because people always do this. They always go on strange trip. I myself traveled all over Europe and actually went on a strange trip myself in Poland. So all of us kind of do this kind of weird stuff. Some of us come back and some of us don't. So this film is, one of the critiques I'd say of the film is it's really slow. I mean, 2 hours 27, it's a long film. You know, a Scorsese film, they did that with, I don't know, this Japanese films I reviewed, which I really liked, but it was really slow as well. And so this has a really slow burn in the beginning, and you're just like, oh my god, is this film ever going to take off, right? So at certain parts of the film, if you're ADHD and you're like, on your phone, you're going to hate this film and probably walk out. But if you can stand through all that really slowness, it kind of picks up at the back end of the film. So if you like a slow, deliberate kind of 70s style film where it's a lot of long pacing, you're going to like this film. If you don't like long pacing, you like a lot of action Marvel comic films, you're going to hate this film, right? It's interesting in this aspect that it's horror done in daylight, and that's pretty original. It's not that typical. Usually it's almost always done at night, you know, because it's easier to kind of scare people with the shadows and fog and all this stuff. And it's daylight, you see everything. Daylight is always associated with hope, warmth, happiness, good times in life, and so there's a lot of positivity in daylight, and so they have to really change it up to make it not positive, right? Negative. The way they capture this really is, you know, Daniel's fragile psychological state from, you know, worrying about her sister, being paranoid about that, to the deaths, and then trying to survive that while they're doing LSD in this village, and, you know, she's just right on the cusp. So that's kind of the really closeness. Now as they get to the village, they have this really interesting layout of the village. They have some normal buildings, and they have some really bizarre designed buildings that are obviously off angles, and you're like, what the hell is this, right? And so the architecture itself sets the creepiness as, you know, they go to these different buildings, and some are normal and some are obviously not normal compared to typical Swedish architecture. So you're just like, And those come in later into play in the film. So they go from the normal buildings to really bizarre buildings as they go through. So the architecture itself plays a part in the progression of the film. And you see this right away, and you're kind of like, don't go in that building. You're like, why didn't you go in that building? And then obviously in the end they go in that building, right? But so the building itself and the architecture itself plays a part. Especially they have, in a lot of these rooms, they have the paintings of the Nordic ruins on the walls and symbols of what they're coming there to study with this cultural event around the midsummer solstice, right? And this is a really typical festival in Sweden and the Nordics with the midnight sun, and they've made a whole festival around it. So it's not atypical, right? But they've kind of taken this spin of this isolated village, kind of a cult feel to it, and they're practicing ancient pagan cult, you know, community. So it's pretty interesting in that aspect. One of the things they do, since they're dropping LSD and then all these weird drugs that are, you know, Nordic or pagan drugs is, they kind of use weird camera angles with blurs to give a feeling that they're on drugs, and you have kind of the film kind of in and out of focus a little bit, and it's kind of a little bit subtle. You really have to see it, I'd say, in the big screen to get a lot of those effects correct. And I think that's very effective in the sense that they are taking drugs, so you have to show it somehow. By using these weird camera effects, they kind of achieve that. There's also a symbolic use of the camera going straight and then it reverses and goes upside down. And this is kind of when they cross the border from the near suburbs of Stockholm into this weird area way far out. And as they cross the villages, this sunlight thing, the gate they go through as well. So there's kind of two foreshadowings that they're crossing into kind of an unknown dimension, something beyond reality, symbolically just with the camera. So there's a lot of really cool camera effects. There's also a callback to this film, I think it was Marnie in the 60s, where they have this rape scene and they turn away the camera, and you have a similar effect where they kind of turn away the camera in some scenes where they're using it to kind of say something's really disturbing happening here, and the camera doesn't even want to watch it. It's so bad. So they have kind of a nice sense of doom build up, this bizarre suspense building up. You have another suicide happens, and then people are like, oh my god, what the hell is this? Should we leave? Should we stay? Some people leave, and then some people stay. It's like, no, it's just their weird cult thing, Like, I'd be out of there in 2 seconds, dude. I pack up in the middle of the night, it's like, see ya, dude. But these guys are, hey, let's stick around, see what's gonna happen. So it has that kind of, singling down the group until they get to just one or two people, right? Which, very typical kind of horror film plot where, the people get eliminated one by one. So nothing too out of the ordinary there. It does have this really nice feel of a cult. They use language in the sense they use ancient Swedish in the film. Now, because I speak German, it's not as scary because I can pick out some of the words in Swedish. And so to me, I just kind of understand it going along. But if you're come from a pure English background, you're going to have this real sensation of, like, oh, what the hell is going on? And there's a real creepiness for people that don't speak languages, so that's a great effect that you can use in horror films. And I think they do a pretty good job there as far as the really bizarre symbolism, bizarre sexuality that's not typical for an American culture, even English culture. English probably get more closer to this with kind of their pagan roots and druid, but not as sexually open as the Northern Europeans are. Very sexually open. It's a very different cultural blend. For example, when I was bartending in Germany, they have kind of a similar aspect on it. And I had a friend, and he had this girlfriend, right? And we're in our 20s. And I was married, but he is single. So he had this girlfriend. His girlfriend invites him to her house, and she lives with her parents, right? And her parents shake her hands like, okay, good night. See you guys tomorrow. And he's like, dude, I'm going to be fucking your daughter. What are you talking about? Like, this wouldn't happen in America, right? Or maybe not even in England, right? You probably sneak around, try to hide out in a car or something. But not in the Nordics, right? Not in Germany, not in Sweden, Norway. This is very typical. I knew a au pair, I babysit for these kids, and then when they were 10, 11, 12, and then when they got to be 16, 17, her mom's like, oh, here's condoms, and be careful with your boyfriend. And the boyfriends would come on over, and you'd be like, dude, this is your own daughters. But that's the culture up there. So they have a lot of this really open sexuality in the film, which kind of is really a break from your typical Hollywood horror film, which is really great. In the final scene, they have this really funny sex scene. It's just hilarious. It'd be very shocking if you come from Puritan America and you'd be like, oh my god, there's nudity. And this is typical in really continental Europe, I would say. It's not so typical in UK. They're still prudish, and they might show breasts here and there, like similar to American novel, but not the full nudity that they have in European film. So if that angle is going to be kind of shocking for an American audience, which is great, I think that's the impact. I just thought it was funny and just cracking up. But yeah, some kind of disturbing, seeing, old ladies naked, you're like, But yeah, pretty funny with one of the final scenes. It's not as horrific. You think it'd be more scarier, but they do have some gruesomeness. I think a lot of this, because it's sunny, it's not as creepy as it could have been, but that's the whole fact. They're shooting in the midnight sun, right? So is a trip like this believable? I would say, unfortunately, yes. A lot of teens in their youth kind of sprint out and take adventures. I know myself, I was invited to go to Poland. I went to Poland. A friend of a friend who was Polish said, hey, let's go on this camping trip. My dad's like, fine, here you go, here's some money. Next thing you know, I'm traveling down to the middle of Poland, between Poland and USSR and Czechoslovakia at the time. And dude, I was all up on my own. They're drinking day and night. They're doing these pagan rituals, like jumping over fire. Well, that was later in the year, but I saw a lot of things in there that was really kind of bizarre. Singing songs like in the 60s, like it was the 60s, but it's actually the 1980s, right? So singing songs around the campfire, John Lennon, the Beatles, all this stuff, which I was like, dude, I knew them, but not intimately. These guys knew all the songs because they were relating to the 60s element of the U.S. as in the 1980s in the Poland, because it was similar culturally in that aspect. It was a revolution, right? So I went through that, and yeah, some trips like this happen when you're a teenager. You know, you go off on your own, you go off with your friends, and you have some bizarre adventures. You know, some of us come back, some of us don't. I came back, so I survived. Although, you know, the same pair of friends end up actually almost in a DUI, and later he went to prison for DUI. So yeah, luckily I wasn't on that trip that he decided to drive drunk and kill someone. So, you know, things like this happen, right? So it's not beyond the pale. As far as the cult status itself, I think, you know, there's been films before like The Village by Shyamalan. What is this guy? Shyamalan. It's one of his best films ever. I'm kind of ruining the plot here, but it's a really great, you know, he's going through the past and all of a sudden, boom, it's in the present. You're like, what the hell happened? And it has kind of this bizarre cult village as well. This one's all set in the present with references to the past. So it's as if this cult had kind of survived from the past to the present day, and they've modernized, you know, as far as bringing in people to their village, but then they're completely pagan when they get to their village. And so this is possible. It's not beyond the realm. I don't think they get away with killing people per se every year. But you do have cults like, say, Jim Jones in the 80s, where he flew like 900 people of his flock, and he was paranoid about the government taking over. And so when a U.S. representative showed up, he's like, oh, the conspiracy's over. They're going to arrest us all. And so he convinced all his followers to commit mass suicide, right? 900 people, 300 of them were kids, and they all committed suicide. And you're like, dude, they killed children. And so these kind of really bizarre cult things, you know, Charles Manson, he was this aspiring weirdo that, you know, was very good at seducing women. He had this kind of orgy attraction of women follow him as he's a budding rock star that was going to be failed. And so then he decides to kill all these people. And so he kills like 7 people and has his followers do it. He doesn't even do it, but he convinces them to kill these people. So, you know, things can be done inside cults that are really bizarre. I know I live in Ohio with the Amish, and they have quite, you know, the weird events too. They don't believe in electricity. There's no radio. There's no TV. There's no phones. And so they live this kind of bizarre thing where they go around a horse and buggy. But if they go to work, they can go in a van as long as it's not Amish driving. They wear like these long clothes from the 1900s. You're like, what the hell is going on, right? And so these kind of bizarre communities, you know, exist going forward. And so these elements that are in the film aren't too far from reality in a way. And so overall, I think if you like really fast-paced movie, you're going to hate this film. If you got ADHD with your phone, you're really not going to make this film. You're going to be the first like, just going too long. What's going on? And so I think they could have edited maybe 20 minutes out of this film, possibly. The best character I really like was Will Poulter as Mark. He's kind of the comic relief. So it's really shot seriously as if, you know, this is really happening. And then he's kind of the comic relief and drops jokes and breaks all these cultural taboos. And so there's a lot of fun things that happen along the way, and he's kind of the comic relief to the film. So I think they used a really good thing. Dani, played by Florence Pugh, I think she played pretty well as far as, you know, this distraught woman, and she just completely breaks down, obviously, in the end. You know, after her sister and parents died, I mean, like, who wouldn't, right? Pele plays like this really pacifist kind of Swedish guy, and he convinces all her friends to go, and then obviously he's the mastermind behind it in a way. So it has kind of a nice unrolling through the plot. You know, I think it's pretty fun, but it's very bizarre. I would just go for the bizarre feature versus being a good film per se. But yeah, the camera angles are pretty interesting. Some of it's shot like a theater straight on from the side. So yeah, it's pretty interesting from a cinematic look, camera look, new take on horror for doing in daylight. As far as an overall good film, kind of like it's a toss-up. Some people are going to hate it. Some people are going to really love this. So it's really kind of, if you like artsy films, you're sympathetic to a long-paced, slow burn film, you're going to like this. If you're looking for like completely scary film, this isn't that scary in my mind, but it definitely has some gruesome build-up to suspenseful moments. So overall, I like the film. I'd recommend it if you like weird films. And if you want to subscribe, you can subscribe below. And I'll see you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.